Hello, and welcome to Boring Stories for Sleep. Tonight, as you settle in, as you allow the day's concerns to slowly drift away, we invite you to join us on a journey.
A journey to another time and another world.
Imagine yourself floating gently down a murky tropical river, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves.
The low hum of a small engine is the only sound that breaks the endless symphony of the jungle. The croaking of frogs, the chirping of insects, and the distant, alien calls of unseen birds.
Our destination tonight is the Asmat region of what was then Dutch New Guinea in the early 1960s. It is one of the last uncharted corners of the earth, a world governed by ancient rhythms, ancestral spirits, and a cycle of life and death profoundly different from our own.
And at the heart of this world, we find a young man from another universe entirely. A young man who carried a name synonymous with unimaginable wealth and power, Rockefeller.
But he did not come here seeking gold or oil.
He came seeking something deeper.
Something that spoke to the very essence of humanity.
He came for art. Our story tonight is the story of Michael Rockefeller.
It is a story of passion and adventure, but it is also a quiet, unsettling mystery. A mystery that begins with a capsized boat in the Arafura Sea and ends somewhere in the deep heart of a jungle that still holds its secrets tightly. So, take a deep breath, let your body grow heavy, and let your mind follow my voice. There is no need to concentrate too intently.
Simply allow the story to wash over you like the morning mist on the river. Together, we will explore the world of Michael Rockefeller, the world of the Asmat people, and the fateful moment that these two worlds collided. This is not a thriller, but a quiet meditation on ambition, tragedy, the vast distance between cultures, and how the truth can sometimes remain last forever. And now, let our journey begin.
To understand the mystery, we must first begin with the man, Michael Clark Rockefeller.
He was not just an adventurer. He was the product of a world of immense privilege.
Born in 1938, he was the fifth child of Nelson Rockefeller, then governor of New York,
and a future vice president of the United States and the great-grandson of John D. Rockefeller Jr., the patriarch of the Standard Oil Empire.
Imagine yourself growing up in such a world.
Lavish apartments on Fifth Avenue, sprawling country estates, an education at the finest institutions. The path laid out for Michael was clear. A prestigious university, followed by a career in the family's business or in politics. It was a world of tailored suits, boardroom meetings, and the structured rhythm of power and money. And Michael, for a time, followed that path. He attended Harvard University, graduating with honors in 1960, but something within him resisted this expected future. His soul was drawn not to the concrete halls of boardrooms, but to the wild places on the map. During his time at Harvard, he was pulled towards anthropology and archaeology. He found a fascination, not in the building of financial empires, but in understanding humanity's ancient empires of culture and belief. His father, Nelson, was a voracious art collector.
But Nelson's interest was in the modern and contemporary the works of Picasso and Matisse. Michael looked further back and further afield. He was drawn to what was then called primitive art, the masks, carvings, shields, and effigies made by societies untouched by modernity.
He saw in them not just exotic artifacts, but powerful, raw expressions of the human experience, windows into entirely different ways of being. Shortly after graduating, before settling into a career, Michael asked his father for a chance. He wanted to go on an expedition, not as a tourist, but as a scholar and a collector. His goal was to acquire a collection of Asmat art for his father's new museum, the Museum of Primitive Art in New York. This was no mere whim of a rich man's son.
It was a genuine passion. He had read everything he could about New Guinea and the Asmat people. He knew the risks, but the idea of being among the first to truly document and collect the art of this unique culture was irresistible.
And so, in 1961, a 23-year-old Michael Rockefeller found himself on the other side of the planet. The images slowly transitioned to documentary-style footage or photos of the Asmat region in the 1960s. Wide, chocolate-colored rivers, dense mangrove forests that looked like impenetrable green walls, simple thatched huts built on stilts above the mud. Let us pause to imagine the Asmat region at this time. It lay on the southwestern coast of Dutch New Guinea, now part of Indonesia.
It was not just remote. It was a separate reality, a labyrinth of muddy rivers and tidal flats, inundated twice a day by the sea.
There were no roads, no cities as we would understand them. The rivers were the highways, and dugout canoes were the vehicles. The jungle was so dense that sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor, creating a world of perpetual green and brown shadow. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of salt, mud, and decaying vegetation. Life here followed the rhythm of the tides, the rhythm of the seasons, and most importantly, the rhythm of ritual and spirits.
The Asmat people had lived in this world for millennia. They were hunters and gatherers, their lives revolving around the sago palm, which provided their staple food.
They lived in villages built along the riverbanks, in long, communal houses made of wood and palm leaves. Their daily life was a constant struggle for subsistence, but it was also one rich in culture, art, and a profound spiritual cosmology. Their spirit world was complex.
They believed the physical and spirit worlds were inextricably intertwined.
Every tree, every animal, every river had a spirit.
The ancestors were a constant presence, watching over the living, offering protection or demanding vengeance.
And at the center of this belief system was a practice the outside world barely understood: headhunting.
To us, the idea seems horrifying, savage.
But for the Asmat, it was not random violence. It was an essential part of their cosmic order.
A death caused by an enemy, whether a human or a disease believed to be the work of sorcery, created a spiritual imbalance. That death had to be avenged, not just for revenge, but to restore harmony and to bring the spirit of the deceased back into the world of the living by naming a newborn after them.
Taking the head of an enemy was the way to complete this cycle. It was less about hatred and more about balance.
It was a sacred duty.
This was the world into which Michael Rockefeller arrived, accompanied by a Dutch anthropologist named Ren Wassing. They were not the first outsiders missionaries, and Dutch colonial officials had come before them. But the region was still largely untamed, and the tension between the tribal world and the colonial authority was palpable. Images are shown of Michael and Ren negotiating with tribal men, offering trade goods like tobacco and steel axe heads in exchange for intricately carved wooden sculptures. For weeks, Michael and Ren navigated this watery labyrinth. They moved from village to village on a makeshift catamaran to dugout canoes lashed together, which they had outfitted with an outboard motor. They traded with the villagers, exchanging modern goods for the artistic treasures they sought, viz. Poles,
which were intricately carved ancestor poles that could stand several meters high,
decorated shields, hourglass-shaped drums, and ceremonial masks. Michael was in his element. Photographs show a man engaged and happy. He was not afraid. He learned some basic phrases of the Asmat language, was respectful of their customs, and participated as much as he could in their daily lives. He was fascinated by the people and their art.
He felt he was on the cusp of a great discovery, of building a collection that would show the world the genius of this hidden culture.
The rhythm of their journey was slow, methodical. Long days on the river under the hot sun, followed by evenings in noisy villages, negotiating for art and documenting their observations.
It was grueling, exhausting work, but it was rewarding. On November 18, 1961, they were making their way to a village on the coast, a place known for having some of the most spectacular carvings in the region. The sea was rough that day, the waves choppy.
Their handmade boat, weighed down with supplies and equipment, struggled in the open water at the mouth of a massive river.
Then, without warning, the inevitable happened. A powerful wave, larger than the others, struck the boat from the side. There was no dramatic scream, no explosion, just the sound of splintering wood and a sudden rush of water. The boat capsized, tossing the two men and their precious equipment into the warm, crocodile-infested waters of the Arafura Sea. Michael and Ren found themselves clinging to the overturned hull, several miles from a coastline that was just a blurry green line on the horizon. The current was strong, slowly pulling them away from shore, out into the open sea. They were alone, no other boats in sight. No sign of life, save for the distant jungle and the endless sea around them. The calm world they had been exploring had come to a stop. A new world of uncertainty and survival had begun. In that moment, floating on the wreckage of their boat, Michael Rockefeller was still the son of one of the world's most powerful men. But to the sea and to the distant jungle, he was just a man, lost, a small speck in a vast and indifferent ocean. Imagine the scene. Two men, adrift on the overturned hull of their boat. The sun beats down, reflecting off the endless surface of the water. The distant shore, that hazy green line of hope, does not seem to get any closer. In fact, the relentless current is pulling them further out to sea. Hours pass. The heat, the thirst, the knot and uncertainty. Michael Rockefeller and Ren Wassing were scholars, observers. Now, they were merely survivors stripped of everything but the will to live.
They spent the night clinging to the wreckage.
As darkness fell, the familiar, almost comforting sounds of the jungle were replaced by the vast, empty sound of the open ocean.
They were two small specks in an immense darkness. By the morning, their situation had grown more desperate.
The tide had carried them further from land.
It was then that a critical decision was made. Ren Wossing, the older and more cautious of the two, believed their only chance was to stay with the wreckage and hope for a passing boat or a search plane.
To attempt to swim the distance to shore, he argued, was suicide. The currents were too strong, the distance too great, and the waters were known to be home to sharks and saltwater crocodiles. But Michael, younger and perhaps more optimistic, or simply more desperate, disagreed. He saw the shore, and to him, it represented action over passive waiting. He felt that waiting was a certain slow death.
Swimming was a chance, however slim. The official record, based on Wossing's later testimony, details Michael's final preparations. He stripped down to his underwear.
He gathered 2 empty gasoline cans, strapping them to his body for buoyancy.
He was determined.
His last words to Ren Wossing were simple and resolute. "I think I can make it." And then he slipped off the hull and into the water.
Wossing watched as Michael, a small figure propelled by a slow, steady stroke, began to swim towards the distant, indifferent coastline.
He watched until Michael became a tiny dot, and then nothing at all.
He was swallowed by the vastness of the sea. Ren Wossing remained with the boat. His decision, born of caution, proved to be the correct one. The next day, he was spotted by an Australian search plane.
A Dutch naval vessel was dispatched to his location, and he was rescued, exhausted and dehydrated, but alive.
He was the only witness to Michael's final moments. His account became the foundation of the official story, a brave young man, tragically underestimating the power of the ocean, swimming off toward a shore he would never reach. The news of Michael's disappearance and shockwaves from the remote colonial outpost of Morocco all the way to the corridors of power in New York and Washington, D.C.
A search had already been launched by local Dutch authorities, but now the full weight of the Rockefeller name came to bear. Nelson Rockefeller, a man accustomed to shaping the world to his will, refused to sit idly by.
He and his wife, Michael's stepmother, immediately chartered a plane and flew to New Guinea to personally oversee the search. Imagine the stark contrast. The governor of New York, a titan of industry and politics, landing in a humid, malarial land of swamps and jungles, a place utterly alien to his own.
He brought with him an entourage of journalists, creating a media storm in one of the most isolated places on Earth.
What followed was one of the largest search and rescue operations ever seen in the Pacific at that time.
The calm, methodical rhythm of the story now shifts to the rhythm of a massive, organized, yet increasingly desperate effort.
The Dutch government deployed everything it had.
Ships from the Royal Netherlands Navy began to patrol the coastline, their crew scanning the waves and the shoreline for any sign of a body. Airplanes and helicopters from the Dutch military and the Royal Australian Air Force were brought in. They flew in meticulous grid patterns over the sea and along the endless miles of mangrove swamps, the monotonous drone of their engines becoming a constant sound over the Asmat coast.
On the ground, Dutch Marines and local police officers, guided by Asmat villagers in their own dugout canoes, scoured the coastline.
They pushed their way through the suffocatingly dense mangrove forests, their boots sinking into the deep, primordial mud. They called up Michael's name into a jungle that offered no reply. Nelson Rockefeller himself went up in helicopters, his face pressed against the glass, scanning the green and brown landscape below for any sign of his lost son, a piece of clothing, a flash of color, anything.
Days turned into a week, then 2. The search was relentless, technologically overwhelming, and yet completely fruitless. They found nothing,
not a single trace of Michael Rockefeller. It was as if the sea, or the jungle, had simply absorbed him, leaving no evidence of his passing. The ocean that had seemed like a surmountable obstacle to Michael had proven to be an impassable void. Hope, which had burned so brightly at the start, began to fade, replaced by a grim sense of resignation.
How could a man simply vanish? The searchers had covered hundreds of square miles of sea and coastline. The scale of the effort was immense, but the scale of the landscape was larger.
After nearly 2 weeks of intense searching, the Dutch authorities made a difficult decision.
The operation was costing a fortune, and the chances of finding Michael alive were now considered 0. They officially called off the search.
Nelson Rockefeller, a man defeated not by a political rival or a business competitor, but by the raw, indifferent power of nature, flew home with a heavy heart. On December 6, 1961, the government of the Netherlands officially declared Michael C. Rockefeller deceased.
The cause of death was listed as drowning.
It was a neat, administrative end to a story that felt anything but.
For the world, and for the history books, the case was closed.
A wealthy young adventurer had taken a tragic gamble and lost. But for those on the ground, for the missionaries and the colonial officials who knew the Asmat region, the story did not feel complete.
The simple explanation of drowning, while logical, seemed too easy. In the quiet conversations held in the small outposts and villages, other theories, other whispers began to surface. They spoke not of the indifference of the sea, but of the complex world of the Asmat people, a world of spirits, rituals, and revenge. The official story was written, but a darker, more complicated narrative was just beginning to take shape, hidden in the shadows of the jungle. For years, the official story was all that was known.
The world moved on, and the tragic tale of the young Rockefeller who drowned in a remote sea became a footnote in the family's epic history. It was a story of adventure met with misfortune, a simple, clean narrative. The case, as far as the public was concerned, was closed. But in the humid, isolated world of the Asmat, stories have a longer life.
Among the Dutch colonial officials and the Catholic missionaries who remained behind, the tidy explanation of drowning never felt quite right. The jungle and the rivers of Asmat were full of secrets, and it was widely felt that the disappearance of Michael Rockefeller was one of them.
There were whispers, fragments of conversations overheard in villages, a shared, unspoken understanding that the sea was not the only thing that had claimed the young American. These whispers may have remained just that rumors destined to fade into local legend, were it not for the work of one man.
His name was Wim van de Waal. He was not an adventurer or a journalist, but a Dutch Catholic priest who had been sent to the Asmat region as a missionary. He lived among the people, learned their complex languages, and gained a level of trust and insight that few outsiders ever achieved. Van de Waal was troubled by the official conclusion.
He heard the same persistent rumors, and unlike his superiors, he was in a position to investigate them. Quietly, patiently, he began to piece together a very different account of what happened on that day in November 1961. He spoke with his parishioners, with other missionaries, and with contacts in different villages.
The information he gathered was so disturbing and so credible that he compiled it into a formal, confidential report for his superiors in the Dutch government.
This report, for decades, would remain buried. To understand what Van de Waal's report uncovered, we must first go back in time, 3 years before Michael Rockefeller's boat ever capsized. The year is 1958. A Dutch colonial patrol, under the command of Max Lapper, got into a violent confrontation with men from a large and powerful village named Otsenep.
The details of the clash are murky, a collision of misunderstanding and aggression, but the result was clear and devastating. The Dutch patrol opened fire, and 4 of the most important leaders of Otsenep were shot and killed. For the Dutch, it was a regrettable but necessary assertion of colonial authority. For the people of Otsenep, it was a catastrophe of cosmic proportions.
In the Asmat worldview, this was not just a loss of life, it created a profound spiritual debt.
The spirits of these powerful men were now angry and restless, trapped between worlds.
They could not rest, and the village could not be at peace, until the balance was restored. And in the Asmat world, there was only one way to restore that balance: a life for a life, a head for a head. Because the men had been killed by the TU, the white tribe or white man had to be killed in return.
It was not a matter of hatred, but of spiritual necessity. The entire community of Otsenep was now living in a state of spiritual emergency, waiting for an opportunity to settle the score and appease their ancestors.
Now, let us return to November 19th, 1961. Imagine a young man, exhausted from hours of swimming, his makeshift flotation devices barely keeping his head above water.
The current, as it turns out, was pushing him almost directly towards the coastline controlled by the very village of Otsenep.
When he finally stumbled ashore, weak and disoriented, he was not seen as an individual.
He was not Michael Rockefeller, the art collector from New York.
He was simply a TU, a white man.
He was the answer to their prayers, delivered to them, as if by the spirits themselves. Van de Waal's report detailed what happened next, based on the accounts he gathered.
A group of men from Otsenep were on the shore when they saw Michael emerge from the water.
They approached him.
For them, this was a moment of destiny.
One of the men, whose own father had been killed in the 1958 incident, speared him.
His life was taken there, on the muddy banks of the shore.
This act,
grim as it is to us, was, for them, a moment of celebration.
The debt was paid. The spirits could be put to rest. Harmony was restored. Van de Waal reported that the men of Otsenep performed a victory dance, and that the grisly rituals associated with headhunting were carried out. The evidence did not stop there.
Other missionaries corroborated the story, having heard similar confessions from their own local contacts. One priest reported that, sometime after Michael's disappearance, men from Otsenep had appeared in his village wearing the clothing of a white man.
Another, Father Zegwood, perhaps the most experienced missionary in the area, wrote in his own diary that it was common knowledge that Michael had been killed at Otsenep. Perhaps the most concrete, tangible piece of evidence emerged years later.
A man from a different tribe, which had a long-standing feud with Otsenep, claimed to have traded for a skull that the Otsenep men boasted belonged to the last white man.
This skull was passed to a Dutch official, a final grim artifact of the hidden story. So why was this deeply credible, if horrific, account buried by the Dutch authorities? Why was the simpler story of drowning promoted so forcefully?
The reasons were likely political.
The Netherlands was in the process of ceding control of West New Guinea to Indonesia. An admission that they had lost control of the region to the point that a famous American could be killed and cannibalized by tribesmen would have been a massive international embarrassment.
Furthermore, there was the Rockefeller family. The authorities likely decided that the story of a tragic drowning was far kinder, far less traumatic than the brutal truth.
And so, the official report was filed. Van de Waal's secret investigation was shelved. The truth, for a time, was sacrificed for the sake of political convenience and personal peace of mind. The mystery was officially solved, even as the real story festered, a quiet, open secret in the swamps of Asmat. For decades, the story existed in two forms: the clean, official narrative of a drowning, and the dark, unofficial whisper of a killing.
The secret reports of men like Wim van de Waal lay dormant in archives, known only to a handful of historians and former officials.
The truth remained shrouded in a fog of time, distance, and deliberate silence.
Then, more than 50 years after Michael Rockefeller vanished, the story was revisited with new determination. A veteran American journalist named Carl Hoffman, intrigued by the persistent, conflicting accounts, decided to pursue the definitive story.
He was not content with archival research alone. He believed the truth still lived in the memory of the Aspat people, and he was determined to find it.
Hoffman's investigation, which would form the basis of his landmark book, Savage Harvest, was a journey back into the world that had swallowed Michael.
He learned the Indonesian language and hired a local translator who could speak the Asmat dialects. He traveled deep into the river systems, retracing the final steps of Michael's journey. This was not the Asmat of 1961. The Dutch were long gone, replaced by Indonesian rule.
Missionaries had brought Christianity, and the outside world had begun to seep in.
But the old ways and the old stories had not entirely disappeared.
Hoffman eventually made his way to Otsenep, the very village at the heart of the mystery. He did not go in making accusations. He went to listen. He spent weeks there, building trust, sharing stories, and patiently waiting. And slowly, the story that had been a secret for half a century was finally told, this time on the record. He found and spoke with the children of the men who had been there that day. He heard the oral history, passed down through a generation.
The narrative was startlingly consistent with the secret Dutch reports from 50 years prior. They told the story of the 1958 killings by the Dutch patrol. They spoke of the spiritual debt that had haunted their village, and they described the day the white men swam to their shore. They recounted how the warriors of the village met him, how he was speared, and how his life was taken to balance the cosmic scales. Hoffman's sources went further, describing in detached, factual terms what happened after the killing. They confirmed that, in accordance with the traditions of a victory ritual, the men of Otsenep practiced ritual cannibalism on Michael's body.
To them, this was not a savage act of hunger, but the ultimate absorption of an enemy's power, the final step in restoring the village's spiritual wholeness. Hoffman's meticulous work did not uncover a new story. Instead, it powerfully confirmed the old one.
He had closed the circle, bringing the secret whispers out into the clear light of day, supported by direct, first-hand testimony. And what of the Rockefeller family?
Throughout the decades, as rumors would periodically surface, their position has remained one of quiet, dignified consistency. They have held to the original, official narrative of drowning.
It is a position born not of denial, perhaps, but of a deep desire for privacy. or wish to let their last son and brother rest with a more peaceful, if less accurate, epitaph. One can understand the impulse to choose the tragedy of an indifferent ocean over the horror of a premeditated ritual killing. The family has never sought to engage with the darker version of events, preferring to let Michael's legacy be his passion for art, not the gruesome details of his end. And so, the case leaves us with a dual legacy.
There is the public myth, the romantic, tragic story of a young explorer, a modern Icarus who flew too close to the sun, or in this case, swam too close to the shore. It is a tale of adventure and loss,
But beneath it lies a far more complex and sobering reality. The story of Michael Rockefeller is a case study in the violent collision of cultures.
It is about the unforeseen consequences of colonialism, where the actions of one group, the Dutch patrol, created the conditions for a tragedy years later. It is a profound reminder that what one culture views as justice, another can view as murder, and that truth itself can be shaped, molded, and buried by those in power to serve their own ends.
And so, our journey into the world of Michael Rockefeller comes to an end.
We began with a young man full of passion, stepping away from a world of unimaginable wealth to seek out a different kind of treasure. We followed him into a world of spirits and swamps, a world with its own ancient laws and deep-seated codes of honor and revenge.
And we are left with a mystery that is, in all likelihood, solved, yet will forever remain officially unsettled. As you lie here now, in the comfort and safety of your room, think of the immense distance between your world and the world of the Asmat in 1961.
A world where the spiritual and physical were one, where the debts of the dead had to be paid by the living, and where a man could be simultaneously a beloved son and a symbolic enemy, his fate sealed by events that happened years before he ever arrived. That world seems so far away now.
The sounds of the jungle, the currents of the sea, the weight of ancestral spirits.
Let them all fade. They are just echoes from another time.
The story is over.
There is no need to hold on to the details, no need to ponder the mystery any longer.
All that matters now is the stillness of this moment,
The feeling of your body resting, the gentle rhythm of your own breath.
The past is the past, a story told. The present is quiet. The present is peace. And the future, for tonight, is simply rest.
Allow your mind to drift away, just as Michael floated on the sea. But let your journey end here, in a place of calm and deep, effortless sleep.
Good night.